All right, here's some bonus material and some thoughts that I had to leave out of the other video for the sake of time, believe it or not, even though that thing was pretty long.
Have you considered a number at this point? Because while it may be uncomfortable, we do it for everything else. We do establish a level of tolerance or intolerance. You don't want to be the heartless guy, particularly as a politician running for office, who says 20 people, or 100 people, or 50 people. That leaves the unspoken implication that the answer is 0.
And then you have these statistics that say shark bites have risen steadily from 1800 to 2018. What kind of a stat is that? You might as well be saying that more people have been bitten by sharks since the time that humans came into existence on a planet that has sharks. It means nothing. The rate of shark bites has not risen per capita, and look at how our population is just exploding. I mean, the potential area in which a shark might encounter a human now is roughly here. You know, if you take that old saying where someone says to an athlete, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Well, now you have made the entire horizon the barn, and even the bad athlete can't miss. Humans are literally on a beach anywhere that it's possible to be on a beach. And not only that, they're in the middle of nowhere if they can find a boat to take them there. Look at the guy at Cocos.
Look at Fiji. You want to talk about the middle of nowhere, and yet people are flocking there. Ironically, many of them to go shark diving.
Sharks can't avoid us. We drag them hook and line onto a swimming beach with fishing gear, and then look around when someone gets bitten and say, huh. And despite everything I just said, all the possible occasions in which sharks would, should, and could be biting people, 5 people on average per year die from shark bites. That's an insanely low number.
I think it's interesting how many people actually stand by the motto, shit happens, and not only stand by it, but will actually preach it, except when it comes to sharks. Because when your chances of being bitten by a shark are like 1,000,000 times lower than being struck by lightning, and you still think that that's not acceptable, yet everything else in your life you're willing to say, well, shit happens, that just doesn't seem fair.
But no, not with sharks. The ocean is the centerpiece of driving tourism to beaches along certain coastlines. That is your answer. It's not an ecosystem anymore. We've commoditized it just like everything else. And sharks interfere with that from time to time, and that is unacceptable. This is not about human safety. Are you kidding me? When else do politicians jump up to try and save you from drowning or anything like that? Furthermore, in New South Wales, at their netted locations, 40 shark incidents have occurred at netted beaches, including 24 incidents between September 1992 and the end of 2016, almost 1 per year. So the bites are still happening, although quite rare, but this does not explain how people aren't dying if the sharks are still getting to them. Out of Jeremy Cliff's own mouth, these are not barriers. This is fishing gear.
So basically they're fishing devices. Many people think that they're a physical barrier. They're not.
The only way to guarantee that people will not be bitten by sharks is to kill all the sharks or not go in the ocean. Or you can engage in a series of other activities that will cause a placebo effect of comfort, such as buying a shark deterrent. I mean, again, you're already at a 99.9% chance of not being bitten by the shark. But if you want to go buy a shark wristband or wear some crap and then not even turn it on and tell yourself that that is the reason that 99.9% didn't dip lower, great, go ahead. Someone will happily take your money.
I think it's worth noting that I was focusing on quote-unquote problem areas in that video. So that was the worst of the worst. Even though those numbers were still, in my opinion, exceptionally low, those are the big problem areas that we're focused on trying to find a solution to. Meaning it doesn't really get worse than those areas. And I think personally that I showed that even those problem areas weren't problems. And if you look at the stats for 2017, the incident at Cocos with the tiger shark was the real strange one. That was the outlier. Although relatively speaking, incidents are still rare, you do have areas that seem to be more problematic than others. Like Reunion Island, Why are none of the solutions being put forth to just go somewhere else? I mean, the arrogance of humans, the selfishness of humans, to not even consider that perhaps it's not a good idea to get into particularly dangerous water, and that a more acceptable approach is to kill everything that was already there so that you can go in there and play. You know, it's not like sharks are standing between us and our drinking water. It's not like sharks are standing between us and our children, and we have no choice but to go into the ocean to save them. We're talking about voluntary recreational activity. And even the people who make a living from the ocean, that's still a choice. That may be a tough pill to swallow, but there are options. This doesn't go for all of them, obviously. Nothing ever does. But there are certain people who fall into this category that are people who make a living from the ocean. Let's take a look at them really quick, because there's definitely a trend.
Worth noting, there's a trend with people who support culling to also be people who work in the industry of raping the ocean, such as abalone divers who put themselves directly in harm's way willfully so that they can make a living pulling abalone out of the ocean where great white sharks live. Or fishermen in general who see sharks as a perceived competition and want to get rid of them so that they aren't eating their fish. Maybe they also happen to be scared of sharks, but one way or another, they are joining the media and politicians in fear-mongering to get their way. That's what you call shitty humans, who have such little respect for nature that not only should they not be allowed to make a living from the ocean, they shouldn't even be allowed to go in it.
I was examining this document that is a summary of different people who submitted evidence for or against culling in Australia, and I just want to focus on a couple of parts here. In particular, I want to take a great big steaming shit on this dude named Fred Prawl, or Prawley, whoever he is, who submitted that shark nets are effective because if a shark is caught in a net or a drumline, sharks know to stay away. Even scientists acknowledge this. Bullshit. What scientists? Show me the scientist who acknowledges that, and I'll show you proof that even stupid people are scientists. It is well known that sharks are drawn to the struggles of a trapped or distressed animal. I have personally witnessed sharks hone in on other sharks that were caught on a hook. How many YouTube videos do you have to see when a bigger shark comes along and eats the other shark or other fish that was on the line? How many photos do you have to see where a fishing net becomes an absolute graveyard of all the other fish that came in there looking for an easy snack and instead ended up drowning themselves? You can't just say shit like that without listing the scientists. And this is what these type of people do. They like to make big, generic claims without anything to back it up. He goes on to say, this happened off the Neptune Islands when some orcas took out a great white shark. They did not see any more sharks for a month or two, if I'm not mistaken. All right, well, are you mistaken or not? You're submitting to an official document here. Okay, I'll let you guys mull that over for a minute. Let it sink in, and you tell me if you can think of any differences between the signal going out of a fish drowning in a net and a fish being killed by super scary ultra mega apex predator. We're also talking about the difference between just generally speaking sharks, all kinds of sharks, because the nets kill basically any and every species that comes into contact with them, versus Clash of the Titans, where an orca comes in and takes out a great white shark, whereas as far as we know, nothing else takes out great whites other than humans. Pretty big fucking difference between fish drowning in a net and orcas coming in. And yet these sort of morons get a public voice and people rally behind them. Mr. Prawley continued, I am not proposing the extinction of a species. Well, how goddamn generous of you. What a great person you are. How kind of you to spare an entire species and allow a few of them to live. I am simply questioning the wisdom of sacrificing one of the greatest aspects of life in Australia for the sake of several large dangerous shark species. Okay, he's talking about weighing the value of people getting to recreate in the ocean, surfing, bodyboarding, etc. versus life. Life. I don't care what organism we're talking about. We're talking about him measuring right to live versus our option to go and engage in a sport out in the ocean amongst all the other options that we have. And having the nerve to pretend that only the dangerous sharks are being affected. They're killing anything and everything. This is where it gets really tricky, because maybe you do think we do have that right. You know, I mean, we are pretty much accustomed to getting whatever we want whenever we want. We're sort of spoiled children amongst the other species in the animal kingdom. It's fine. I will entertain that for the sake of argument, because the real problem here is that when people get caught up in that and rally behind it saying, oh, well, crap, I'm not going to give up surfing, it confuses you and distracts you from the fact that there are ways to continue surfing without resorting to killing things. Killing things in the ocean isn't your only option to move forward. As I said, these guys like to spew out generic, abstract statements that they can't actually back up, but they sound catchy and people will rally behind them, such as, we are the apex predator. No, we're not. No, we're not. We're not predators at all. We are vile, scary, disgusting creatures that sit at home and have food brought to us, or we go to a grocery store after we've raised it in absolutely horrendous conditions and then had it slaughtered on massive scales. That's not predatory behavior. That's manipulative, exploitive behavior. You might feel okay with that, but don't call yourself a fucking apex predator. Human life must prevail over all types of animal or marine life. Yeah. Whew! I mean, we almost got wiped out there for a second. Our population is really suffering. Human life must prevail. Fucking 5 people died in 2017, and we have killed almost everything else on the planet that isn't us, but we're talking about human life must prevail. It is such absolute goddamn horseshit rubbish that it shouldn't even be put into print. And you look down at the credentials of who these people are, and Mr. Fred Prawl, I guess he's just a loudmouth from the community who wanted to have his voice heard, and Donald Monroe, what do you know? Spokesperson for board riders and surfing reserve. Okay, so unfortunately in Australia we now have this changing trend where you have these surf clubs that actually no longer are in homeostasis with the ocean and want their pastime to be a risk-free event rather than understanding that they are engaging with nature when they go out there. It's a very sad but very real thing taking place over there. In addition, this shitbag has the nerve to say that they are an effective and cheap way of protecting people while causing minimal disruption to the marine environment. That completely throws all evidence out the window. I mean, it's like listening to President Trump here, where he doesn't have to back up anything he says and just says, listen, folks, trust me, folks, ask anyone. I've been talking to a lot of people, and a lot of people are saying. The truth is that these nets and drumlines cost millions of dollars, and they are wreaking absolute havoc on the ocean. And unfortunately, we seem to have the position of being able to declare what havoc is or isn't. You know, it's like we haven't wreaked havoc until things are almost completely gone. And then we're like, okay, we'll allow them to reproduce for a year before we start wiping them out again. You know, when did we become such a calloused species to where just drowning a couple of turtles wasn't something to be upset about? I mean, that is horrific. That is horrific. You watch some of that footage of these animals desperately trying to breathe and being entangled and say, yeah, that's fine. Then you know why we are already lost as a species. That shit is not fine.